The unlikely candidate. The grand hall of Zephora Palace was filled with warriors, soldiers, and hopeful recruits. They had all gathered for a single purpose, to prove themselves worthy of joining the Queen's elite force. This was the most powerful group in the empire, the protectors of Queen Seraphina and the guardians of peace. Among the strong and skilled warriors stood a man who did not belong. His name was Darian, and he had no legs. He sat in a floating chair, powered by old technology, watching the others prepare for the competition. His clothes were worn, his body thin, but his eyes burned with determination. People whispered as they saw him. Some laughed. Others simply ignored him. "Why is he even here?" a tall soldier muttered. "Maybe he got lost," another joked. But Darian did not react. He had come here for a reason. The Queen's arrival. A sudden silence filled the hall as the grand doors opened. Queen Seraphina entered, her royal robes flowing behind her. She was known for her wisdom, her fairness, and her sharp mind. Behind her stood her most trusted warrior, Commander Vex, a giant of a man with cold eyes and a scar across his cheek. The Queen walked slowly, her gaze moving across the gathered warriors. Her voice, though calm, carried strength. "You are here because you seek honor," she said, "but not all of you will prove worthy. Today, I will choose one candidate, the one who will face the ultimate test." A murmur ran through the crowd. Would she choose the strongest, the fastest, the smartest? The Queen's eyes scanned the warriors, then stopped. On Darian. The hall fell silent. Even Darian looked confused. Commander Vex stepped forward. "Your Majesty, surely you are not serious." But the Queen's expression remained calm. "I am very serious." She turned to Darian. "You. What is your name?" Darian hesitated, then answered, "Darian, Your Majesty." "Darian," she repeated. "Do you believe you deserve this chance?" The room waited, expecting Darian to stammer, to make excuses, to admit defeat. Instead, he lifted his chin. "I have nothing to lose, and everything to prove." A slow smile touched the Queen's lips. "Then you are my choice." The outrage. The moment she spoke, chaos erupted. "This is madness," shouted one warrior. "He can't even stand, let alone fight," another argued. Commander Vex looked displeased. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, this is a mistake." The Queen raised a hand, and silence returned. Her voice was calm, but firm. "Strength is not measured by muscle alone," she said. "If he is unworthy, he will fail. But if he is stronger than all of you in ways you cannot see, then he will prove it." Her words left no room for argument. Commander Vex exhaled sharply, then turned to Darian. "Very well," he said coldly. "Then he will take the test, and when he fails, there will be no excuses." Darian met his gaze, unshaken. "I don't need excuses. The test begins." Later that evening, Darian was taken to the Royal Research Facility, a place where technology and science merged with human potential. The Queen stood beside a team of scientists as Darian was brought inside. The room was filled with machines, glowing blue lights, and the hum of energy. In the center stood a glass chamber, large enough for a person to step inside. One of the scientists, Dr. Alric, turned to Darian. "If you agree to this test, there is no turning back. The process is dangerous." Darian looked at the chamber, then at his lifeless legs. "What exactly will happen?" Dr. Alric gestured to a pair of cybernetic legs displayed on a nearby table. They were sleek, metallic, and filled with advanced nanotechnology. "We will fuse these with your nervous system. If your body accepts them, you will walk again. But the process is painful, and there is a high chance that you will not survive." Darian's heart pounded, but he did not hesitate. "When do we start?" The Queen watched him closely. "Are you truly ready to risk your life for this?" Darian met her gaze. "I have spent my whole life being looked down upon. If I die trying, at least I die standing." A flicker of approval passed through the Queen's eyes. Then let the test begin. As Darian was prepared for the procedure, the warriors outside continued their training, unaware that history was about to be made. A crippled man was about to take the first step toward becoming something no one could ever imagine, and none of them were ready for what was coming. The impossible challenge. Darian lay inside the glass chamber, his heart pounding like a war drum. The cold metal frame beneath him sent chills up his spine, but he ignored the discomfort. His entire life had been spent feeling powerless, watching others walk past him, treating him as if he were invisible. But now, everything was about to change. Above him, the cybernetic legs hovered in midair, suspended by robotic arms. They weren't just artificial limbs. They were something far more advanced. Made from nanotitanium alloy, fused with bioelectric nodes, and programmed with adaptive AI, these legs weren't just designed to replace movement. They were designed to enhance it. Dr. Alric stood at the control panel, his fingers moving swiftly over glowing keys. Once we begin, your body will be flooded with nanocytes. They will merge the implants with your nervous system, rewriting your biology. He looked up. If your body rejects them, the pain will be unbearable. Darian gave a small, sharp smile. I've already known unbearable pain. Let's start. The Queen watched silently from behind a reinforced glass wall, her expression unreadable. Commander Vex stood beside her, arms crossed. He will not survive this, he muttered. The Queen's gaze remained steady. We shall see. Activation. Pain beyond limits. Dr. Alric pressed a button. The robotic arms descended. The moment the cybernetic legs touched Darian's stumps, his world exploded into fire. It wasn't pain. It was something beyond pain. Every nerve in his body screamed as the nanocytes surged into his bloodstream, seeking out his neural pathways, forcing their way into his flesh. His vision blurred, his muscles seized, his breath came in sharp gasps. He tried to scream. No sound came out. Every cell in his body felt like it was being ripped apart and rebuilt at the same time. His spine arched violently against the metal surface. His veins glowed beneath his skin, pulsing with an eerie blue light as the nanotech rewrote his very existence. Outside the chamber, one of the scientists turned pale. His heart rate is spiking too fast. He's going into shock. We should stop, another scientist said urgently. No, the Queen said, her voice sharp. Not yet. Commander Vex narrowed his eyes. He is dying. But the Queen shook her head. Look closer. Inside the chamber, Darian's body was changing. Evolution. More than human. The cybernetic legs, which should have taken weeks to adapt, were merging in real time. The nanocytes were evolving faster than expected, weaving themselves into his muscles, tendons, and nerves. His heart stabilized. His breathing slowed. His fingers, which had been clenched in agony, relaxed. Then his legs moved. First, a twitch. Then, a flex. Then, in one smooth motion, he sat up. A hush fell over the laboratory. Darian looked down at his new legs. They didn't feel foreign. They felt natural, like they had always been a part of him. He moved his toes. They responded. He bent his knees. No pain, no delay, just movement. The chamber door hissed open, and Dr. Alric stepped forward, his voice shaking. How do you feel? Darian slowly slid off the table, placing his feet on the cold floor. The moment his soles touched the ground, something clicked inside him. Power, speed, balance. It was all there, instinctive and ready. For the first time in his life, he stood. He took a deep breath, then took a step, then another. Then, before anyone could react, he sprinted. Like lightning, he shot across the room, moving faster than any human had a right to. His movements were flawless, his balance perfect, his reflexes sharp. He dodged equipment, weaved between obstacles. Then, Just because he could, he leaped. He soared through the air like a predator, twisting mid-flight, and landed soundlessly. The room was silent. Everyone stared. Even Commander Vex looked stunned. Darien turned to face the Queen. His chest rose and fell with exhilaration, but there was no exhaustion in his body. No weakness, no limits. For the first time in his life, he was more than whole. He was something new. The Queen studied him carefully, then spoke. "Welcome back to the world, Darien. The challenge awaits." Later that night, Darien stood alone in the training arena, testing his new legs. He could run, jump, pivot, and move with a precision he had never imagined possible. But he wasn't naive. He knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Behind him, the heavy doors creaked open. Footsteps echoed in the empty space. He turned to see Commander Vex, standing tall with a wooden training sword in his hands. "You've been given a gift," Vex said, tossing Darien a weapon. Darien caught it easily. His new body responded perfectly. "Now," Vex continued, rolling his shoulders, "let's see if you deserve it." Darien gripped the sword, feeling the weight of the challenge before him. A slow smile spread across his face. "Let's find out." Pain and rebirth. Darien's body was alive in a way it had never been before. His new legs weren't just replacements. They were extensions of himself, moving with an effortless precision that felt almost supernatural. He could run, leap, twist, and land with inhuman grace. But power alone wasn't enough. Standing in the royal training arena, he faced his first real challenge. Across from him, Commander Vex stood tall, his massive frame like a mountain of muscle. In his hand, he held a long, curved training sword. He had been the Queen's greatest warrior for years, feared and respected across the Empire. And now he was here to test Darien. The Queen watched from above, her expression unreadable. The court nobles and elite warriors whispered among themselves, some still unwilling to accept Darien as a true contender. "He has legs now," one of them muttered. "But that doesn't mean he knows how to use them." Vex rolled his shoulders and raised his sword. "Let's begin." Darien tightened his grip on his own wooden sword. His fingers flexed, feeling the weight. This was it, his first fight as a man reborn. The first clash. Vex moved first. Despite his size, he was incredibly fast. His sword came down in a brutal arc, aiming to knock Darien's weapon aside. Darien dodged. Not just dodged, he vanished. 1 second, he was there. The next, he had sidestepped so quickly that Vex's attack sliced through empty air. Gasps echoed through the arena. Vex smirked. "Fast, but let's see how well you fight." This time, he came at Darien with a flurry of attacks, slashes, feints, thrusts. His movements were sharp, precise, powerful. Darien's instincts screamed to retreat, but something inside him refused. He blocked. He parried. And then, without thinking, he counterattacked. A surge of energy flowed through his cybernetic legs, and in a blink, Darien moved inside Vex's guard. He twisted his body and delivered a perfect strike to Vex's ribs. Crikey! The force sent the commander stumbling back. He let out a grunt, pressing a hand to his side. His armor had taken most of the blow, but the impact was real. The arena fell silent. No one had ever pushed Vex back like that. Darien blinked. Had he really just done that? The Queen's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Vex exhaled and gave Darien a long look. Then, without warning, he charged again. The breaking point. This time, Vex wasn't holding back. He fought with the full force of his strength, forcing Darien to react at inhuman speed. Darien's legs burned as they pushed him beyond his limits. Run, jump, twist, strike, block, counter. Every move felt sharper, more precise. But with every second, his body began to scream. The cybernetic legs weren't perfect. At first, they had merged with him seamlessly, but now they were demanding more than his human body could give. His muscles, his bones, his nerves, they weren't made to keep up. A sharp burning pain flared up his spine. His heart pounded too fast. His breaths grew shallow. And then, his vision blurred. Vex saw the weakness. He stepped in and landed a crushing blow to Darian's shoulder. Darian collapsed. His sword clattered to the ground. His cybernetic legs twitched, struggling to respond. His arms shook as he tried to push himself up, but his body refused. Vex towered over him. "Get up." Darian gritted his teeth. His mind screamed at his body to move, but the pain was overwhelming. He felt like he was breaking apart. Why? His legs were supposed to make him unstoppable. So why was he failing? The Queen's voice rang out, calm but firm. "Enough." Vex stepped back, lowering his sword. Darian remained on the ground, gasping for air. The Queen walked toward him, her gaze piercing. "What did you feel?" she asked. Darian clenched his fists. "Like my body was tearing itself apart." She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "The cybernetic implants are advanced. Too advanced. They require more than just your mind to control them." Darian frowned. "Then how do I master them?" The Queen tilted her head slightly. "You must stop fighting as a human. Your body is not the same anymore." Darian looked down at his shaking hands. Not human. He had spent his whole life trying to be like everyone else, trying to prove he wasn't weak, that he wasn't different. But now he was something else entirely. Something more. The Queen turned away. "Rest for now. Tomorrow, your real training begins." Darian remained on the ground as the others left the arena. His body ached, his breath was heavy, and his mind was racing. He had lost. But for the first time in his life, he had lost in a way that excited him. Because he knew one thing for certain: he would rise again. The first test. The air inside the Royal Training Hall was thick with tension. The high walls, lined with banners of past victories, seemed to whisper the weight of history. Only the greatest warriors had ever trained here. And now, Darian stood among them. His new cybernetic legs were powerful, faster, stronger, and sharper than anything he had ever known. But power alone wasn't enough. His first fight against Commander Vex had taught him that. His body had failed, unable to keep up with the sheer intensity of movement. The cybernetic legs demanded more than just effort. They demanded something beyond human limits. And today, he would find out if he could become that. A new kind of training. Darian stood in the center of the hall, breathing steadily. His body no longer ached the way it had the day before. The nanocytes in his bloodstream had accelerated his recovery, healing bruises and reinforcing his muscles. But the Queen had made it clear: your body must learn to move differently. You are no longer bound by human rules. Fight like a human, and you will lose. Fight like what you are becoming, and you will win. Across from him, Vex was waiting. But this time, the commander wasn't alone. 4 other warriors stood beside him, members of the Queen's elite guard. They were the deadliest fighters in the Empire, each one trained to be a perfect killing machine. Darian exhaled slowly. 5 against 1. He felt a familiar whisper of doubt. Could he really do this? Then he clenched his fists. No more doubts. No more limits. Let's begin. The test begins. The first warrior attacked without warning. A blur of motion, a blade slicing through the air. Darian's body reacted instantly. His cybernetic legs moved before his mind could process it. He sidestepped effortlessly, the blade missing him by inches. His body felt lighter, faster. A second attacker lunged from behind. Darian's new instincts took over. Instead of dodging, he pivoted hard. His enhanced strength sent him into a perfect spin, and before his opponent could react, Kuraihiki. Darian's leg shot out, striking the warrior's ribs. The impact sent the man flying across the hall. Gasps echoed from the watching nobles. He wasn't just adapting. He was evolving. Speed like lightning. The next two warriors rushed him at once, their movements perfectly synchronized. But Darien could see the attack before it happened. It wasn't just speed, it was something deeper. His cybernetic enhancements were calculating movements, predicting enemy positions, analyzing threats before they even made their move. The first warrior aimed high. The second aimed low. Darien reacted in an instant. He leaped. Not a normal jump. A blur of motion. His feet pushed off the ground with an inhuman force, launching him into the air. He twisted mid-flight, flipping completely over his attackers. He landed behind them without a sound. The warriors turned in shock. Too slow. Darien moved before they could recover. He surged forward, grabbed the first man by the collar, and flung him across the hall. The second tried to strike, but Darien's reflexes were too fast. He caught the man's wrist, twisted, and sent him crashing to the ground. 3 down. Only Vex remained. The final duel. Vex's eyes were unreadable. He had watched everything. The impossible speed, the instinctive movement, the raw power. And yet, he didn't look impressed. He simply lifted his weapon, a long warhammer, and rolled his shoulders. "You're fast," he said, "but speed won't help you against me." Darien readied himself. "We'll see." Vex charged. It was like being hit by a collapsing building. The force behind his attack was enough to shatter stone. Darien dodged, barely. He felt the wind from the warhammer's swing rush past his face. If it had connected, it would have broken every bone in his body. But Vex didn't stop. His swings were relentless, each one forcing Darien back. His movements weren't just strong, they were calculated. Vex wasn't just a brute. He was a strategist. Darien needed to think differently. "I can't fight him head-on, but I don't have to." He took a deep breath. Instead of attacking, he waited. Vex swung again. Darien watched the motion carefully, not just the attack, but the split-second gap between swings. There. The instant Vex's hammer reached the lowest point of its arc, Darien moved. Faster than thought, he dashed forward, inside Vex's reach. The commander's eyes widened. Darien didn't give him time to react. He twisted, planting his foot against the ground, and with all the force his cybernetic legs could muster. He struck. His fist slammed into Vex's chest plate. The sheer impact sent the massive warrior skidding backward, metal boots screeching against stone. The hall fell silent. Vex had been pushed back. Darien straightened, his breath steady, his body buzzing with energy. For the first time, a slow smile touched the corner of Vex's lips. "Good," he said. "You're learning." A new path. Queen Seraphina stepped forward. Enough. The test was over. Darien stood in the center of the hall, his hands still clenched, his heart racing. He had faced the Queen's best warriors, and he had won. But this wasn't victory. This was only the beginning. The Queen studied him, then gave a single nod. "You are ready for the next step." Darien exhaled slowly. Whatever came next, he was ready. Betrayal in the shadows. The palace corridors were silent at night, bathed in the dim glow of floating energy lanterns. Outside, the twin moons of Zephora hung low in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the grand halls of the Queen's citadel. Darien had trained harder than ever before, and his cybernetic legs felt more natural with each passing day. But something deep inside him felt uneasy. A storm was coming. He could feel it in his bones. And he was right. The council's secret meeting. Deep beneath the palace, in a hidden chamber, a group of nobles and high-ranking officials sat around a long, polished stone table. Their faces were grim, their voices hushed. At the head of the table sat Lord Eridan, the Queen's most powerful advisor, and the man who secretly opposed her rule. He tapped his fingers on the table, his sharp eyes scanning the others. "You have all seen it," he said darkly. The queen has chosen the cripple. A man who should be dead now walks among us like some unnatural machine. One of the nobles, a woman with silver hair and a scared cheek, scoffed. His abilities are dangerous. If he can defeat Commander Vex in training, what else is he capable of? Another man nodded. The queen is blinded by her idealism. This, Darien, is a weapon, and one that we do not control. Lord Eridan leaned forward. Exactly. Which is why we must ensure that he is removed. A deadly silence followed. Then, slowly, the nobles began to nod. The decision was made. Darien had to die. The kill switch. At the same time, Darien stood in his private training chamber, testing the limits of his cybernetic legs. He was faster than ever before. Stronger. His reaction time was now beyond human. But something was off. A strange pulse ran through his limbs, like an unseen force pressing against his muscles. A glitch. A malfunction. He frowned. He had never felt this before. Then his legs stopped moving. His heart slammed against his ribs. He tried to take a step forward, but his body froze. Panic surged through him. What's happening? Suddenly, an unseen voice crackled in his ears. A cold, calculating voice. It seems you've become quite a problem, Darien. Lord Eridan. Darien's blood turned to ice. How was he speaking to him? Then it hit him, the cybernetic implants. They weren't just weapons. They were controlled. Eridan's voice was smooth, almost amused. Did you think the Queen had full authority over your enhancements? No, boy. We have always had a failsafe. Darien's fingers twitched, but he couldn't move his legs. They were locked. And now, I will show you the cost of defying us. A sudden, agonizing shock ran through his entire body. Darien collapsed. His limbs convulsed, fire surging through his nerves. He gritted his teeth to stop himself from screaming. Then, the door to his chamber slid open. Assassins. The assassination attempt. 3 masked figures stepped inside, moving like wraiths. Their armor was black, their blades silent. Darien was helpless. He struggled against the paralysis, his mind racing. Think, think, think. The lead assassin raised a blade. Goodbye, warrior. The blade plunged downward. Then everything exploded. A deafening blast ripped through the room as the chamber doors burst open. Darien barely registered the flash of light before the assassins were thrown back by an unseen force. A lone figure stood at the entrance, a blade humming with electric energy. Queen Seraphina. Her eyes burned with fury. The assassins scrambled to their feet, but the queen moved with impossible speed. She cut through them like a storm, her blade slicing effortlessly through their armor. Within seconds, it was over. Darien gasped, still unable to move. His body trembled from the shock pulses in his legs. The queen turned to him, her expression dark. They tried to control you. Darien forced a breath. They almost succeeded. Her jaw tightened. Not anymore. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his cybernetic legs. A faint blue glow pulsed from her palm. The paralysis faded. Darien gasped as control returned. He clenched his fists. They had tried to break him. Now, he was going to break them. The Queen's gamble. Later that night, in the Queen's private chamber, Darien stood before her, his hand still trembling from the encounter. The Queen's gaze was sharp. You understand now, don't you? Darien exhaled. They'd never wanted me to succeed. She nodded. Lord Eridan and his council fear you. They see you as a threat, and they will not stop until you are dead. Darien's jaw tightened. Then let's stop them first. The Queen studied him carefully. That is exactly what I intend to do. She turned toward a hidden panel in the wall. With a single press, it slid open, revealing a dark suit of armor, sleek and battle-ready. Darien, she said, you are no longer just a soldier. You are no longer just a man. She stepped aside, allowing him to see the armor up close. You are the first of a new order." Darien reached out, his fingers brushing the cold metal. The future of the Empire was shifting, and he was at the center of it. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting for something greater. The assassination attempt. The palace was a fortress, its walls carved from indestructible Zyphorian stone, its gates guarded by the most elite warriors in the Empire. No one could get inside without permission. And yet tonight, the enemy was already within. Darien's breath was steady, but his muscles were coiled like a spring. The Queen had revealed the Council's betrayal, but there was no time to strike first. Lord Eridan and his conspirators had already made their move. The Queen was the target, and Darien was the only thing standing between her and death. The silent intruders. The attack came at midnight. Darien had been standing outside the Queen's private chamber when the palace's defense systems went offline. The blue glow of the energy barriers flickered once, then vanished completely. A second later, the lights went out. The hallway was plunged into darkness. Darien's cybernetic enhancements adjusted instantly. His eyes flickered with a faint blue glow as his vision shifted into infrared mode. And then he saw them. Shadows moving through the darkness. Assassins. Not just any assassins. Phantoms. The Council's most elite killers. Darien didn't wait. He launched himself forward just as the first assassin struck. A battle in the dark. The clash was silent. No words. No battle cries. Only the hum of plasma blades and the quick, sharp movements of two warriors fighting in the pitch-black void. Darien's cybernetic legs reacted faster than thought. He twisted, dodging a blade by millimeters. His counterattack was swift. His foot lashed out, striking an assassin square in the chest. The force sent the enemy flying into a wall. Before he could recover, another assassin came from behind. Darien dropped low, spun on one leg, and swept the enemy's feet from under him. The assassin collapsed, but before Darien could land the finishing blow, pain exploded through his body. A sharp, paralyzing current surged through his cybernetic limbs. His vision blurred, his muscles locked. The kill switch. Again. Somewhere in the darkness, Lord Eridan's voice echoed through a hidden comlink. "Did you really think I wouldn't have a backup plan?" Darien's legs failed beneath him. He hit the ground hard, unable to move. The assassins closed in. And this time, there was no escape. The Queen's last stand. The doors to the Queen's chamber slammed open. Queen Seraphina stood tall, her royal robes flowing like shadows in the dim torchlight. But in her hands, she held something no one had ever seen her use before. A blade. Not a ceremonial sword. Not a weapon for show. A real weapon. The assassins hesitated, just for a moment. The Queen wasn't supposed to fight. That was their mistake. She moved like lightning. Her blade cut through the air, and in the blink of an eye, one assassin fell. Then another. Then another. Darien watched in stunned silence as the Queen fought like a warrior of old. She had always been seen as a ruler of wisdom, of strategy. But tonight, she was something else. A fighter, a protector. But there were too many enemies. An assassin lunged from behind, blade raised. Darien's heart stopped. His body was frozen. He couldn't move. And then, he heard a voice. The awakening. The voice was not human. It echoed inside his mind, deep and ancient, vibrating through his very bones. You are more than this. The nanocytes in his bloodstream flared to life. The cybernetic implants, which had once been a tool of control, rejected their programming. Darien felt something shift. The paralysis broke. Power surged through his limbs. The artificial enhancements were no longer just technology. They were his. The wrath of a cybernetic warrior. Darien moved. 1 second, he was on the ground. The next, he was everywhere. The assassin's blade never reached the Queen, because Darien caught the attacker midair. With one swift motion, he snapped the enemy's arm like a twig and sent him flying across the room. The remaining assassins turned, too late. Darien unleashed hell. He darted through the battlefield, his movements faster than human eyes could follow. Every strike landed with bone-shattering force. An assassin tried to stab him. Darien sidestepped effortlessly and countered with a devastating blow that sent the enemy through a stone pillar. Another came from the right. Darien's foot lashed out in a roundhouse kick, breaking the assassin's mask in half. The final enemy tried to run. Darien didn't let him. With one leap, he cleared the distance and grabbed the assassin by the throat. His enhanced grip tightened. "Who sent you?" Darien growled, his voice colder than steel. The assassin choked, struggling, but before he could answer, a sharp blast rang through the air. A sniper shot. The assassin's head snapped back, his body going limp in Darien's grasp. Dead. Someone was watching. Someone was covering their tracks. Darien dropped the body and turned toward the queen. She stood unharmed, her sword still dripping with blood. Her gaze met his, filled with something he hadn't seen before. Not just approval. Trust. The turning point. Minutes later, the palace guards stormed the chamber. The queen stood tall as they kneeled before her, awaiting orders. Her voice was steady. "Seal the palace. No one enters. No one leaves." She turned to Darien. "Lord Eridan has crossed the line. The council has betrayed us." Darien clenched his fists. "Then we end this. Tonight." The queen nodded. "Yes, but not with swords." Darien frowned. "Then how?" A small, knowing smile touched her lips, with something far more dangerous. She stepped toward a hidden compartment in the wall, pressing her hand against the panel. With a soft hum, a holographic map appeared, a blueprint of the entire empire. She pointed to the council chambers. "We won't just fight them. We will expose them to the world." Darien's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just war anymore. This was a reckoning. The final gamble. The empire held its breath. For years, the Council of Lords had ruled from the shadows, their influence stretching like invisible chains across the throne. Their wealth, their power, it had seemed untouchable. Until tonight. Tonight, everything changed. The broadcast of truth. The council chamber was a vast hall of marble and gold, designed to impress and intimidate. At the center of the room, Lord Eridan stood tall, his dark robes flowing as he addressed the gathered nobles. "The queen has failed us," he declared. "She has chosen an outsider, a cripple made of metal, to stand above real warriors. She is no longer fit to rule." Murmurs of agreement spread through the chamber. The plan was simple. Tonight, the queen would be removed. But Lord Eridan didn't know one thing. The queen was already watching. And so was the entire empire. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. The nobles turned as a holographic screen flickered to life above them. Dozens of other screens appeared across the empire, in the streets, in the homes, in the training grounds of the queen's warriors. And there, standing before a hidden camera, was Darien, exposing the traitors. Darien's face was calm, his voice steady. "People of Zephora, you have been lied to." A sharp silence fell over the chamber. "The council," he continued, "has plotted against the throne. They tried to assassinate Queen Seraphina. They sent men to kill me. They see all of you not as citizens, but as pieces on a board, to be moved or sacrificed as they see fit." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lord Eridan's face twisted with rage. "Enough of this nonsense. Shut it down," he barked. But the feed did not cut. The queen had ensured that the broadcast was untouchable. Then came the real blow. The screen flickered, revealing hidden recordings, meetings where Eridan and his conspirators plotted against the queen, discussions of secret assassinations, proof of their corruption. It was undeniable. One by one, the nobles turned on Eridan. "Is this true?" one of them demanded. Eridan snarled. "You fools. Do you think she will spare you? The queen is weak. We must take control before. A loud crash cut him off. The doors to the chamber burst open. Darian stepped through, flanked by the Queen's elite guard, and at the center of the room, Queen Seraphina stood, her presence undeniable. Her voice was calm, but undeniable in its authority. Your rule is over, Eridan. The fall of the council. Chaos erupted. Some nobles fell to their knees, swearing loyalty back to the Queen. Others fled, realizing their time of power had ended. And Lord Eridan, he didn't surrender. With a flick of his wrist, his personal guards lunged forward, swords drawn. A last, desperate gamble. But Darian was faster. He vanished, his cybernetic legs propelling him like a blur through the battlefield. He weaved between attacks, countering with strikes that shattered armor and sent soldiers crashing to the ground. Eridan turned to run, but Darian was already there. He grabbed Eridan by the collar and slammed him against a marble pillar. Your time is over. Eridan gasped, struggling. You think you've won. He spat. You think the people will accept someone like you. Darian's expression remained cold. They already have. With a single motion, he threw Eridan forward, straight into the feet of the Queen. She looked down at the man who had tried to destroy her. Take him, she ordered. The guards moved forward, shackling Eridan as the once powerful lord screamed in rage. The council was finished, and the empire was reborn. A new future. Hours later, Darian stood on the highest balcony of the palace, looking over the city. The people had seen the truth. The Queen's enemies had fallen, and for the first time, the empire stood united under a leader who truly cared for them. And yet, Darian knew this was only the beginning. He had spent his life being overlooked, discarded. He had been weak, then rebuilt, and now he was something new. Queen Seraphina approached, standing beside him. You did well, Darian. He exhaled. It's not over. She nodded. No, but you've proven something today. He turned to her. What's that? The Queen's gaze was steady. That the strongest warriors are not the ones born with power, but the ones who rise when no one believes they can. Darian smiled. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving. He was living, and the future was his to claim. The end.